Hello and welcome everyone for another, in fact, the final in our four-part professional development series from the CONVERGED user group. We have done fantastic 3 parts to get us to this point. We are now going to deliver the presentation, and I am joined with a fantastic panel of experts to get this done today. Again, my name is David Giesiga. I'm with the CONVERGED user group. I'm joined by a longtime CONVERGED user group member and supporter, Suzanne Pickett, as well as my special co-host, Nigel Moulton. Suzanne, Nigel, welcome.
Thank you.
Dave, it's good to be back, man. Good to be back.
Great to have you here. So just to sum up for folks who are just tuning in, or maybe haven't seen the other parts yet in the series, our professional development series is an opportunity to bring the expertise from the CONVERGED user group board of directors out to the broader members. We assessed infrastructure earlier. We've conducted the financial analysis, and we worked to develop the perfect pitch based on all of that information. Now we're going to talk about conquering the presentation and give you tips and tricks from our distinguished panel of experts on how to conquer this presentation, how to deliver it. Suzanne, can we start with you? When we think about conquering the presentation, you got to start with the slides. How do you think about that? Where do you start?
Every time I have to start with who is my audience? Who am I going to be presenting to? Who's going to be in the crowd? And whether that is in person or virtual. Of course, the last couple of years have mostly been virtual. But really, for the most part, I'm trying to influence, and I want to make sure that I know exactly what my audience is looking for, what those key outcomes are, so that I can make sure and hit those as the top notes. I want to get their attention. I want to get it fast, and I want it to be brief and to the point. So that is the first thing that I look for is who am I speaking to? Who am I attempting to influence? And then building my first slide from there.
So it's almost like you're starting with, okay, if I have the elevator pitch, how do I build it from that?
Yes, I have to assume that I have to get somebody's attention in that first 10 seconds. So it's really important for me to understand, again, what that desired outcome is and make a very bold statement on my first slide. This is the current status. This is what's going on. This is the thing that you are the most interested in. And then I might follow that up, perhaps even on a summary slide or same slide with what are the key risks here? What are the key indicators this might fail? What actions need to be taken to avoid that? Or what are the next steps? So not just, hey, where are we with the current project or program or product? But what do we need to do next? And then what help do I need to get there? What roadblocks do I need to remove? And between those 4 things, risk, roadblocks, action items, and current status, I can pretty much deliver everything I need to in that first 10 seconds. And I'm not going to read those slides, but I'm going to put those slides on the screen, maybe in a Zoom, maybe in an auditorium. I think Nigel's going to speak to that in a moment. But really, I'm telling the story behind those key outcomes. I'm not reading those slides. I never want to read slides, and I don't want to have slides read to me. So for me, that's how I start every time.
Fantastic. Nigel, I think I heard 4 R's there. Did you catch those?
From the previous one, no, I didn't. But I think I would add, when I build a presentation, I start with a blank piece of paper. And the first thing I write down is how long do I have? Mm-hmm. So okay. I frame it in terms of time. I think Suzanne's commentary around know who's in the room. I think Suzanne's commentary around this is an outcome-led conversation, because at the end of the day, you're trying to get people to do what you want, right? You're trying to persuade them that your opinion, your point of view is valid, and that based on the sort of work that you've done, because let's face it, you will have done a huge amount of work in the background to get ready for this. You actually want the outcome to sort of go your way, right? So know the time boundaries, knows who's in the room, and then what Suzanne's talked about, I actually do on paper, which is I write down big circles with big topic headings in them, and in each of those topic headings, the flow automatically comes out of title slide, conclusion slide, and then the actual content itself, right? And actually spending the time either on your own probably to start with, and then maybe sharing it with your team, is you sort of create that whiteboard of the content. And I guarantee you, whilst it looks like a mess to start with, the flow will automatically generate itself from that. And that then gives you the basis on which you then, actually go and deliver and develop the material itself. Again, to Suzanne's point, and we'll talk about this a little bit in more detail later, black backgrounds with white writing tend to be more impactful. No more than 3 bullets per slide. If you can make that happen, again, tends to be more impactful. I know sometimes you can't summarize, but sometimes the detail you can put up into backup slides and appendices and have that read sort of independently, if you will, right? So I think a combination of what Suzanne's talked about in terms of that outcome-led, the power, the impact that you're going to deliver in the opening 10 seconds. We'll talk more about that in a second. But building that framework around a whiteboard, throwing the ideas in there, bounding it in time, that to me is almost best practice for how I would go about building these things.
Yeah, absolutely, Nigel. Absolutely agree with that. And I think you can all see I have a whiteboard behind me. So I do a lot of brainstorming on that whiteboard, a lot of diagramming and workflow on that. So I can see it and visualize it and then get that timing down, because that timing is critical, especially 100%. When you're upselling, right? You're selling up a couple skip levels.
Great points. So we talked about getting putting the script together, so to speak. What about preparation? What are some tips and tricks you guys can share on how you prepare before the presentation itself?
Just to get myself ready and get myself in a mental state, if you will, to present. First and foremost, I like to have my area ready, and I keep a notepad handy. I have one right now next to me, so that I can jot notes or follow up on questions throughout. For me, it's not just about the content, although that is key. It's also about the environment. So if I'm presenting virtually, I want to make sure I understand that platform. Typically, it's Zoom or other brands of conferencing materials that we all use, but on occasion we get a different one that we've never used. And so I want to make sure that I understand how to share that content, how to toggle between video and the content that I need. If I need to share audio or video within that, how do I do that across multiple platforms? I'm comfortable with some, not comfortable with others. I try and make sure that my lighting is prepared. So I have some very inexpensive little tiny tripod lights sitting behind my laptop, behind my screen, behind my webcam, to make sure that I'm illuminated as much as I might not want to be in front of the camera all the time. That lighting is key. You want it behind your camera, not behind your head, because that just creates a shadow. And people start focusing more on the visual aspects of your presentation versus the content. And really, you want everything to be as smooth as possible. So they're focusing on what you're saying and how you're saying it versus your environment around you. So, and one last thing on that point, because I'm sure Nigel has some tips too. I tend to make what I would call extreme eye contact with my webcam, because I want to make that connection even over a virtual call or a virtual presentation. I want, when people look at me and not my slides, to know that I'm making that eye contact. I want them to know that I'm speaking to them. And that's important to me, because I would do the same if I were in a physical auditorium or a physical podium doing a presentation, making sure that I'm making eye contact. It's a difficult thing to do in a virtual world, but I think it's key.
Yeah, I think one of the substitutes is, in the physical world, when you're presenting, the action of standing up actually gets you ready, right? You might be invited in to speak, or you might be walking into a room, but the action of standing up actually gets you ready. Okay. And I think, Suzanne, you're at a standing desk.
I am. Yes, I am standing.
Right. And I'm at a seated desk, right? So therefore, the range of movement I have is restricted because of that sort of aspect to it. But let me concentrate more on the physical side, because, you are going to be nervous, and that's a good thing, right? You actually want your palms to be sweating because it focuses your mind, and the kick of adrenaline that you get when you stand up if you can control that, is actually works massively to your advantage. You can't do it in the virtual world, but in the physical world, big open gestures to welcome people, eye contact around the room in exactly the same way that Suzanne describes in the virtual world is absolutely critical in the real world. Having a relaxed manner, you know your content, and these people are here to listen to you, right? So don't be afraid to be, one, the subject matter expert, and two, the reason that many of these folks are in the room is because they want to hear what you have to say. So in the physical world, the use of big open gestures, the use of eye contact around the room is key. And again, knowing how your slides are formatted, where the bullets are, as you click the clicker, you know what's coming next. You almost don't have to look over your shoulder. Sometimes because you've got a monitor in front of you, which you can mirror the slides with, but sometimes it's because you know the content so well that it doesn't even sort of enter your thinking, really, okay? And I think Suzanne is right, and we'll reinforce this. Those first 10 seconds, if you were to measure your heart rate and your breathing, once you've got those 10 seconds out of the way, they both return to normal, okay? So you come down off the adrenaline a little bit, you come down off the nerves a little bit, and then you become you. And your ability to then, work the room, either physically or virtual, is down to your skills on the day. But as Susanna said, eye contact is critical. Big open gestures in the real world are critical. And to point, Suzanne's point, I probably failed the lighting test a little bit here, whereas Suzanne clearly does not. But Suzanne is standing at her desk, right? So she has freedom of movement and degrees of movement that can be advantageous, right? And if you're going to put music in and you want to do a little dance, Suzanne, I think, wouldn't be unheard of, right? You've got a Pat Gelsinger story you might want to share at some point. But I think, there's the principles are the same. The physical environment, the virtual environment, obviously different, but what we've talked about in terms of getting you ready for this, I think the final piece is the sort of tips and tricks stage, and we'll come to that in just a second, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you guys also, we were talking earlier, certainly get some sleep beforehand. That's probably very important. Coffee is the friend, but coffee is a frenemy. Too much can really amplify that that adrenaline nerve hit at the beginning. It might not taper off as well, or you might just be edgy rather than positively excited. So watch out for that as well. You guys were talking a little bit about mentors and dress rehearsal. I think we covered some of that, but let's talk a little bit about mentors and what do you mean by that with the pitch? Can you expand on that?
Yeah, sure. I can for sure. And I do it both ways. I will just yesterday, in fact, I was asked to put together an executive presentation, and maybe the message wasn't the most positive. Now I'm attempting to be constructive with the data and the metrics and the message, but overall some decisions have to be made. And before I polished it up and cleaned it up and made it that 10-second wow, I wanted to know I was on the right track. So I reached out to my leader and said, hey, this isn't polished. It's mostly data driven, but this is the concept I'm working with. Can you provide feedback to me? Because I want to know that I'm on the right track, because what I do reflects on my leader, reflects on their leader, et cetera. And again, my point is that I want to be able to influence the desired outcome, right? The thing that I'm looking to achieve. So I want to make sure that I'm on point for my message and how I'm doing it. And one of the things that I've really learned, especially in the last few years, is that the presentation that I would give to my immediate leader may not be the exact same presentation I would provide to their leader. I might pull some detail out, but I also want to make sure I have that detail at the ready. We'll get to that in a moment. We want to make sure we have that index that Nigel mentioned, kind of that reference point of any metrics or KPIs or questions that people answer. But that, Dave, is how I would do that.
Well, another one, and it's a silly one, but it's dress code. Mm-hmm. If you're dressing a bunch of developers, don't show up in a collar, right? Yeah. It's not what they expect. And similarly, if you're addressing senior execs, don't show up in your Alice in Chains t-shirt, right? It's not going to work. So, but that can be something that can upset the dynamic, because if you physically walked into the room, you would look and feel out of place, right? The same is true to an extent in the virtual world as well, right? So I think that putting yourself in the mind of the room that you're going to be in, and knowing what the people are going to be wearing, and and Suzanne's talked about this already, what the touch points are, right? These are things they might not want to talk about. They might be uncomfortable in some dimension because, Suzanne, to your point, it's not always good news representing, right? Sometimes we have to be able to show the challenges. And so use of language is important. The use of a pause in a sentence can have a dramatic impact. So practice using that. And for me, when I build these presentations, I rehearse and rehearse and rehearse. But my way is to do it in my head, because what I'm trying to do is build the soundtrack and the talk track in my head so that it becomes almost automatic on the day. And, you'll find this in the best of sports people. To become the best, you just have to keep practicing. And for me, whilst it might look supernatural on stage, behind the scenes, there's a huge amount of effort that goes into thinking about how you say it, what you're going to say, when you're going to say, and using, techniques, Suzanne, that you and I have been taught in sort of formal lessons about hand gestures, use of language, use of eye contact. This is all super important. With a Western audience predominantly, I think if you've got audience from different cultures, that would change. Mm-hmm. But predominantly, for the most part, I think the audiences we're addressed would fit that bracket, and therefore we feel quite comfortable. Okay, so rehearse, so that on your day you are as prepared as you can be. As I said, you are the subject matter expert. They're here to listen to you. There's an outcome that you're trying to guide folks towards, and I use the word guide advisedly there, right? And again, Suzanne, I think if we combine everything that we've talked about, that to me sort of phrases how we put these things together, how we think about it, and ultimately how we deliver it.
Yeah, absolutely. One more point too on the mentor question, David. This kind of goes along. I will often, I'm not building this data on my own. There are teams of people that are doing the work, that are providing the metrics, that have the know-how to pull this data together. And once I pull it together and I have a reasonable flow or a draft flow of my presentation, I want to run it by my subject matter experts, by the team that knows this content the best. Now I'm presenting it and I understand it as a leader of these teams, but I want the feedback from my team as well, because I want to know from them that I'm presenting the data in the best possible light and the most accurate. So while I'm asking for advice from my leader, I'm also asking for feedback from individuals within my team or from the team itself. And maybe I even practice with them as well. More importantly, it shouldn't always be me presenting the content. I want to make sure that I'm also developing my team. So when I can, if we can provide a demonstration of, if we built a portal or a dashboard or some metric, I might mix up my presentation, especially in a virtual world, and hand it over to one of my managers or one of the engineers to demo as well. And I think that's a technique that is important, making sure that you're bringing in fresh voice, fresh perspective, and also giving the audience a little bit of a break on the voice and the tone and everything they're listening to, because it's like, oh, hey, someone new is on stage, or hey, someone new is on camera. And it causes that little bit of a break that people need these days, especially in heavy meetings and virtual rooms that we're all part of.
Well, Suzanne, you just teed up the segue fantastic for me. Not only was this great information, we have the opportunity now to take a break, maybe change our wardrobe a little bit, but encourage folks to take the live questions. So, folks, this has been fantastic discussion. We're not leaving. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back. So please put your questions in the chat. We've still got all sorts of time where you can pick the experts' brains. Suzanne, thank you so much. Nigel, thanks. We'll take a quick break, and we'll be right back for the live questions.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
All righty. Nigel, Suzanne, great to see you. Nigel, you've got eyes zipped up and you've got a slight wardrobe change. Fantastic conversation we just had, and we have some questions already in the chat. But before we get started with that, Suzanne, you and I were talking earlier. What we didn't get to, and what I'd like to explore a little bit more, is when you're presenting, if someone raises a question that starts to take it down a tangent or down a rabbit hole, how do you kindly bring it back to where you need to take the conversation going? I love your technique with that, Suzanne. And then Nigel, I saw the knowing glance there. There's certainly some hardcore ways you can do it, but maybe share some technique that might have a little bit more finesse than I might bring to the situation.
Yeah, David, can you hear me okay?
I got you loud and clear.
Okay, great. Just wanted to double check. I kind of fussed with my system a little bit. So a couple different things. There's always the good old just ignore the question, but it really again goes back to depending on your audience. So if, for example, I'm presenting to my boss's boss and he asks me a question, I need to make sure I'm as prepared as possible to respond to that. And in that case, it's probably going to be the data behind the data, right? So I have to get a little meta on occasion. And typically what I'll do is I'll create a do not share, some hidden slides in the background. So I have this great executive summary slide that's just high level and kind of tells the story and paints the picture. But if someone says, hey, how did this line go up like this? I say, hey, you know what? I have a slide for that. Or I'm going to get to that in just a couple slides. I can answer it now. Or if you're okay with it, we'll get to that in the course of the presentation. So it's okay to stop, repeat the question back. If you're prepared to answer it, or if you have a slide coming up, it's okay to just say, hey, I've got that covered. We'll get there in a sec. Or on occasion, depending on who's asking, I might say, yeah, let's go to that slide. I have that ready for you. So you can see the data behind the chart, or the data behind the data, if you will. It really just depends. If it's a complete tangent, or if it's meant to kind of throw me off my stride a little bit, I might just do something very simple and say, hey, I can't answer that right now, but I'll be happy to take that offline. That's like coffee, right? It can be your best friend. Or I can have a follow-up conversation with you. Or, hey, that's not the direction we went with this, but we can definitely discuss that after it. It is okay during a presentation if someone asks you a question that takes you just off track to say, hey, I can definitely speak to you about that. I'll schedule something. Just follow up.
Great advice. Nigel.
Yeah, so I think Suzanne's covered it pretty well. The only other one I use is the mindful of time line. So if it's a rabbit hole question, and you know these when you come across them, I will often say, I'm mindful of time. And you're saying that to do two things. One, to sort of reset the agenda back to where it needs to be. And then the sort of follow-up sessions would be, very much as Suzanne has said, which is mindful of time, happy to take that one offline with you, happy to schedule a one-to-one with you. And if you've got someone in the room who can take notes, actively look at that person and say, can you note that down as an action, please? Right? So either you note it down because you've got the pad in front of you, or you've got someone in the room who can actually sort of say, yes, I'll take that as an action. So you signal to the questioner that this is not the appropriate time to go into that level of detail. Per Suzanne's point, I am the subject matter expert. We will talk about it, but now is not the time and place. So mindful of the time is a good one because it sets everybody back on course. And frequently in a day, you know what? If this is a day of presentations, you'll have a slot, and you don't want to overrun your slot. You want to be professional, certainly in the sense of timing. And so use time as a crutch here to sort of aid you in managing the whole sort of process and making sure that you have the detail level of follow-up at the appropriate juncture.
Yep. Great points. And I think you go back to the whole, while you're presenting, you are in command of the presentation, the conversation. So it's okay to take charge and remember to do that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. One thing I don't think I've told David, you or Nigel, is that I actually failed speech. I failed it due to nerves, right? And so it's okay to not necessarily have that confidence the very first time you're presenting, or even the second or the third. But the more prepared you are, and the more supporting data that you have, the more that you're able to speak to the content, I think that just naturally starts to build some confidence. And so today, while I still get nervous, and while I still might get a little jittery, at the same time, I know that I know the content, and that gives me some of the confidence I need to speak. So that confidence carries over if someone is heckling, if you will, or interrupting what you're trying to get across in the time frame you're trying to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, speaking is, it's a skill, it's a talent, it's a sport, it's a muscle. I couldn't lift 225 pounds the first time I tried to lift 225 pounds. But you don't start with something like that. If you downhill ski, you don't start with off-piste double black diamonds. You build up to it. So, and allow yourself that growth. When we're looking at the questions here, great questions, and folks, please keep them coming. We've got two phenomenal experts, someone who went from failing speech to now
Great.
You can't afford her speaking engagement fee.
Right.
We've got what do you do if you do not know who the audience will be? So great question, a bit of a scary situation. Certainly you don't want to walk into the room with that. Nigel, weigh in first, please.
Well, sometimes that can actually be your best friend, right? Actually, the toughest presenters, the toughest audiences are the people you know well, because they know you. They know when there are little tells to give away that, what state of mind you might be in, that, to Suzanne's point, you might not be feeling confident, and that transmits itself, right? And people who know you well will identify that. A room full of strangers is your best audience because you have no expectations walking in. They have some expectations because they will have read the brief, so they'll know why they're in the room. They're there because they're interested. They're there because they actually want to hear what it is that you want to say. So I'd actually counter that actually knowing an audience is harder than addressing a room full of strangers. And I think that can be advantageous, right? I certainly find if I'm doing big stage presentations, I am more relaxed than if I'm presenting to a bunch of executives, all whom know me and whom I also know, right? So don't be afraid of it. Embrace it. Remember, you're the subject matter expert. People are there because they want to listen to you. And this is going to sound odd, but have fun with that, right? Because sometimes lightening the mood, and we can talk about in question 3 how you save yourself from being lost in your own words. We'll get to that. There's a couple of techniques, but have fun with it, right? Genuinely enjoy it, because if you genuinely enjoy it, that's the energy that you will transmit into the room, either on video or in real life. And it's easier to do that in a room full of strangers.
Yeah, I totally agree. And embrace your mistakes. It's okay to be authentic. For example, right now, I have a puppy in the room with me, and at some point she's going to bark or do something that I don't want you all to hear. And that's kind of our new reality, right? We're all dealing with that. Now, I know Nigel brought up he slipped in the Pat Gelsinger incident, where I was on a very large stage in person. It was a few years ago, and it was
At a world, 500. Right?
Yeah, it was a TM World, and it was a customer briefing or presentation, if you will. Very large live audience, about 500, 600 plus people, and it was being simulcast live globally. Of course, it's Pat Gelsinger, and I will admit it, I was nervous, but I also, when I get on stage, have this what I'll call lead singer syndrome. So I was walking the stage, and I had the mic, and I was walking to the front, and if I had had a backup band, it would have been pretty awesome. And we got to the Q&A point, and someone in the audience, said, well, okay, you've talked about this and all these great things you're doing, but how do you do it? How do you work with
from an infrastructure perspective, how do you work with developers or database administrators, or and I won't do it here, but I ended up quoting the Spice Girls, and I did not mean to. And the whole audience, I just got beet red and blushed, but it was authentic. I was embarrassed, I showed it, and I laughed, and I enjoyed the moment. And I think that was probably the best takeaway for me from that, is I made a mistake, ran with it, and just had fun with it.
That's the best advice, whether you're staring into a webcam or whether you're standing on stage and all you can see is the lights coming at you, or if you're in virtual reality and the connection fades in and out, or your speaker just disappears. Embrace it, have fun with it. Everyone else probably noticed it too, so you might as well just call it out and say, okay, yep, that was fun. Now let's get back to the story, or back to the presentation.
Yep, for sure.
Nigel, a couple things here that you alluded to. So question 3 and 4 seem to be a bit related here. We've got, how do you save yourself from being lost in your own words? That's never happened to me. And if you have lost your confidence during a presentation, do you have any techniques to get it back so you can continue the presentation? I think they're related. I think I'd love you to weigh in, please.
Yeah, so I would agree that those two are extremely tricky. And they're tricky because they sort of get to the core of you, right? You're either on stage or you're in a virtual environment. You lose your words and you feel yourself go, right? And the trick, in fact, the only technique I have is to breathe, is to catch your breath, count to 3, 1, 2, 3, as you exhale, and then reset. Okay, so go back to the start of that point, go back to the point you were at, but do it from a new grounding, right? And you've used a breathing technique to actually make sure that you yourself are feeling as comfortable and as confident as you can be after what's just happened, right? In the real world example on stage, actually looking at your feet can sometimes be a technique. Reaching for a glass of water, if you have one to hand, is a technique. But the breathing one is the one I think that for me is always the catch-all, which is the count to 3 as you exhale, and then sort of restart yourself from there. And if you're lost in your own words, this is frequently because you're excited. You actually want to make a point. You find yourself maybe going off point a little bit. And I would argue that you actually recognize you're doing that. So stop yourself, catch yourself, and actually, make a physical action. Stop. That's great. We've done that. We've covered that point now. And the action of doing that actually stops you, right? And it sort of helps you get back on track. These are never easy situations to recover from. Your mouth goes dry, your palms sweat, you feel terrible because you feel that everybody is watching you. Trust me, they want you to recover. They want you to get back at being your best. And as I said, for me, a little breathing technique, exhale, count to 3, and pick yourself up again. And I promise you, it doesn't take long to get back to a comfortable state.
I'm sorry, David, could you repeat that question?
Very good.
Right, that's another great way to do it. So we all know, especially if you're, let's say you're on stage, which is a big deal. We all want to present at VMworld or Bell Technologies World or some other great big event. There will always be a bottle of water handy, and it's okay to pause and just say, take a sip of water. Everyone does it. Everyone needs to do it because you start getting dehydrated and there's lights and it's warm, but it also gives you a moment to take that breath to resettle. And especially if someone's asked you a question and you're thinking, oh my gosh, how do I answer that? What direction do I go? Do I need to stay on, on target, on time frame? Just ask them to repeat the question. You say, I'm sorry, I missed that. Or, that's a great question. Let's talk after, right? So just and create that relationship and say, oh, I want to meet with you. I want to talk to you. I want to answer your question in person. That is okay too. So, and then resettle and get back on what you're trying to get across, because it's your agenda, It's your presentation, and it's your outcome that you're working toward.
And, all of this is fantastic tactics for in the moment. The thing to reiterate is a lot of this will go away or is easily recovered from with the preparation. So you don't just run a marathon after winter time of not being outside. There is work that has to be done up to the point. That said, if you're running a marathon, you might need to stop and tie your shoelaces. You might trip and catch yourself. You might even fall down, but you pick yourself back up and have faith in the practice, the training, in yourself, and the work that you've done. And I think that with breathing is always fantastic. All of these techniques, those pauses do allow for that reset. And if folks haven't tried meditating or haven't tried yoga or haven't tried these calming, relaxing, the reset of the physical with breathing is amazing. And then it connects right to your head too. We've got, let's see here. Okay, we're scanning the chat. I think we're doing okay there, but folks, we've got a couple more minutes. So if you've got more questions, have
we answered number 2, David?
Yep, I'm not sure. Very good. I was going to go to that one right now. Russ says, how do you gauge attendee attention and encourage engagement? Well, right now, Russ, I would say, I'm just assuming you guys are paying utmost attention to me and really enjoying this conversation. Sometimes it's hard. It's hard because folks may be paying attention, but you get nothing in the group chat. You get a few things in the Q&A. Other times it's very easy. The chats just lighten up and people are going scrambling around. Q&A happens. But when you're on stage in person with lights, that might be tough. Suzanne and Nigel, I'll throw that to you. Also, if you can't see the other folks, yeah, it gets tough. And you could check in with them. You could say, hey, do you guys have more questions?
If I'm, and I Nigel can speak to this as well, but if I am in person, if I'm sitting around a table, or maybe I'm standing at the head of the table, I hope not, I hope it's more casual than that. Or if I am on that stage with Pat Gelsinger, I still find people in the audience and I try and go through and look at each, not every single one, obviously, but I try and find someone and make eye contact and pause for a second and make sure I'm going eye to eye. When I'm virtual like this, I find, sometimes something will come in a chat or, it could be a Slack or a Teams message, and maybe I'm making such great eye contact with the webcam that I'm not seeing it. So I might step back and pause if Nigel's speaking and take a moment to understand, what's coming in and where we are, or maybe even hear that my audio is not great or my video is stopped or something, probably on this face. But really for me, especially for something like this, it's the questions that you're asking and then the chats that are coming in. But it is, I will say it is very challenging when it's live and you are presenting to also sit and be chatting. So I'll take advantage of when Nigel's talking to do that.
So I think there's 3 scenarios and they get more extreme. So in the virtual world, worst case scenario is you're on a Zoom meeting, let's say with 25 people and everyone's got their video turned off. So if you want to simulate that, do the presentation with your eyes closed. And so anything that you can do to encourage your audience to turn their video on allows you to scan the tiles to make sure that people still are engaged, okay? So if you want to simulate the worst case scenario, do your presentation with your eyes closed, because that's what it's like on Zoom when everybody's tiles are black, right? And there's no fun in that whatsoever. You might as well just be reading a monologue. If you're in a meeting room, Suzanne's point is absolutely spot on, which is make eye contact. Use broad, open gestures. You typically will be standing up. So don't point, use open palm. Look around the room, engage an individual for 1-2 seconds max whilst you're still talking. and then move around so that you're making eye contact with a lot of the people that are in the room, right? For you doing it, it feels very unnatural. For the people watching it, it feels very natural, okay? So there's quite a dichotomy there in terms of the experience the presenter feels and the experience that the audience feels, okay? And for those of you who get the pleasure of speaking on big stages, for those that you enjoy it, make sure that in the center of the stage you mark with tape a small white cross or a black cross, right? Just use tape to mark it. It's the center of the stage. During your rehearsal, count the number of paces it is to go to the left-hand side and count how many paces it is to go back to the center, and do the same out to the right-hand side. So as you're delivering a keynote, to Suzanne's point, you can't make eye contact with 1,000 people, but you can walk to the corners of the stage. You can walk back to the center, and then you can walk out to the other corner of the stage. And that is a useful technique for making sure that, one, as you're mobile, it actually helps you speak a little bit more freely, bizarrely, right? But secondarily, again, if you're in the audience, it means that the presenters actually try to sort of come out to where you are and is trying to address you directly. So mark the center of the stage with some tape, count out the number of paces, count the number of paces back. And again, remember there are training courses that you can go on to learn to be better presenters, from sort of the 101 level all the way up to doing some of the big stage work that both Suzanne and I have done historically, right? So don't be afraid to ask within your own companies to go on these sort of presentation skills training courses, because they will give you tips and tricks and techniques that will boost your own confidence. And again, I said it in the video and I'll say it again now. It is okay to feel nervous before you walk out there, be it on camera or on the real stage. In fact, you want to be nervous. Yep. You want the adrenaline flowing, you want the focus, and when the lights come up and the cameras go on, you come to life, right? So don't think that nerves is a bad thing. It actually helps you, I think, in a number of ways. So we've gone slightly off topic there, David, I'm sorry, but I think we've covered quite a bit of ground as well.
Mindful of time. You missed my joke. Maybe you heard it. Maybe I stepped on you. Mindful of time.
I missed the one other thing, if I'm perfectly honest with you, but that's okay.
Yeah, I know. It's a lot of times they're just, they're so intellectual. One other thing I will say, I've been in executive briefing meetings where, it's a bunch of back-to-backs and people are trying to cram things in tight. And I've come into the room and you can just see the room is just, they need a break. So you could also just say, hey, folks, I'm up next, but before we do, how about everybody stands up, or raise your arms over your head, just get some sort of movement, something different that they're not aware, that they've been missing. That kind of can jumpstart engagement and refresh and the whole reset that you talked about earlier, Nigel, with your audience. So not only for yourself, but also for your audience. We are at time, folks. Thank you so much for your questions. Thank you for participating in the professional development series. Nigel, been a fantastic co-host. Suzanne, you've been a wonderful and extraordinary special guest. Thank you so much. All of these are available for on demand. So this is the fourth in the series. If you're looking for that, it's on the Converge User Group website under resources. We also have our events page. Please take a look at that. Join us for upcoming community hours and other events. With luck, we'd love to see you at in person at DTW. That's going to be sometime May 2 through 5, 2022. Fingers crossed we'll all be in Vegas and able to raise a beverage of our choices after we clear the stage. Happy holidays, everybody, for those of you. Oh, I guess I just time-stamped this video. Nope. It's no longer evergreen. But again, from the Converge user group community to everybody out there, happy holidays. Thank you very much. Be safe, and please tune in again. Send us information on what you want to hear from. And here's to a great 22. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.
Cheers now. Thank you.